Welcome to another exciting episode of the Insurance Untangled podcast. My name is Ben Tuyene, and today I'm your solo host for this particular episode. Super excited about this episode. As you know, Naren, Jordan, and myself have primarily just been talking about topics that we know in dentistry as it pertains to sort of untangling the mess of insurance and dental practices. But today, we're going to do something different. I'm so excited to bring on a good friend of mine, Brian Hanks, who is probably one of the most, I would say, smartest transition expert in dentistry in terms of helping you buy a practice, right? He's written a number of books, and I've read and bought, is it 2 or 3 books that you wrote? I got them on the shelf over there. I should have counted before we started. But at any rate, welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Ben. I will take smartest. I was hoping for best looking, but smartest is more accurate. So thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You know, I met your entire family for the first time, 3-4 weeks ago.
Yep.
We're both on the flight to New York City for spring break.
That's right.
And I got to say, all around, you also win the award for best looking family as well.
Oh, thanks. Right back at you. Yeah, it was fun.
Kids, yeah, you have some really good looking kids. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But yeah, no, I'm excited to be a guest. I've been a listener of the podcast, big fan of yours, Jordan's, the whole team. And anyway, so excited to dive into the topic.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I get a lot of comments and feedback about your podcast from mutual friends. And so for our listeners that haven't checked out Brian's podcast, we'll put a link to your podcast in the show notes for other listeners to go in. So the number one piece of feedback that I hear about Brian and sort of his educational platform is he doesn't hold back. Just he goes through what he knows and understands and just gives you the information that you're looking for. And so we highly recommend his podcast too. It's been rated as one of the #1 podcasts for many years. At least you won that award for a few years running now.
I did, yeah. Yep.
Congrats on it. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Well,
let's dive in.
Yeah. Let's dive into this. So what we want to talk about is this whole part about practice acquisitions on whether to buy a PPO practice or a fee-for-service focused practice. What is your take on that, Brian? And is it a big deal or not when you're making a decision on what type of practice to buy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so if you phrase the question, okay, I think I want to buy a practice. Should I buy a PPO focused practice or a solely fee-for-service practice? There's a very, very clear answer, and it's the right answer. Okay, the answer is yes. That's it. I mean, I'm tongue in cheek a little bit, and I understand the nuance of the question, and we will get into the nuance. But the important thing is to buy a practice, and I am not a believer that every single dentist needs to own their practice. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that if you want to be an owner and you want to make more money and B, have some control over your career. And what I mean by control is not controlling. It's control over, who you work with, which assistant you like and don't like, the patients you see and you don't see, the hours you're open, when you take vacations, all those things. And yes, which insurances you do or don't take. You got to be an owner to have that type of control. And so the most important thing is to get into ownership. Now, yes, if you are certain that you're only a fee-for-service dentist and PPO insurance-based patients are going to be a terrible fit for you, okay, yes. As you're looking for acquisition opportunities, have a bias towards fee-for-service focused or maybe even 100% fee-for-service practices. And target those. Just know that it's going to take you a little longer to find them, and you're going to have a little more competition when you're either bidding for or trying to be the buyer of those practices. But all things being equal, have a bias towards where you want to go. But if you think, down the road, I've been listening to Ben, I've been listening to Jordan, these guys, and they're making a pretty compelling case for fee for service, or at least, a healthy relationship with these insurance companies. And this one that I'm looking at is kind of 80% PPO. That's not necessarily a red flag. It just means that potentially you have a little more work down the road to transition that practice into the type of practice that you ultimately want. Is that a hedged enough answer for you, Ben? I know that that's a little bit of a hedge, but does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I often wonder about me not being an expert in the world of transitions is do personality types sort of
Mm,
make a difference in terms of whether I want to do a fee for service or a PPO route? Does that have anything to play into that?
it's a good question. I think it's personality type might be an outcrop. I think I would phrase it as a propensity for business. You
Hmm,
know, does the
yeah.
dentist tolerate the business side of dentistry? Or does the dentist, and that same dentist, by the way, tends to be the clinical ninja, right? That
Mhm.
every CE course they take is clinical focused. Or are you a business owner who happens to be a dentist and happens to work in people's mouths, and you actually kind of do like the websites and processes with the front desk and how do we answer the phones and which software do we use? If that gets you excited, then I would say then you're probably going to be a better fit for something more like a fee for service office.
Mhm.
But if you're a clinical ninja and you just love working on teeth, then for the most part, with some exceptions, obviously, you can pretty much tolerate anybody that sits in your chair, and that's going to be where they come from is going to be irrelevant to you. Fee for service, PPO doesn't matter.
Yeah, got it. And the only reason why I asked that question is a few years ago, well, actually, a client of mine started a practice in Park City,
Mm.
like a started from scratch.
Wow.
And initially, she wanted to go the route of PPO. So, because of course there are no existing patient records, right? New space, everything's brand new. She was of the mindset because of the Utah sort of how things are done here in terms of dentistry and insurance. At the time, everybody took insurance. Everybody took every dental plan under the sun, right? And then the pandemic started, and her launch date was June 1, 2020.
Oh gosh.
And here she is in network with a bunch of PPOs. Well, between June and December, she treated 600 patients
Wow.
and quickly started to realize that the need to be in network was unnecessary.
Yep.
But I think her personality type, well, the way she is as a person is she's such a networker, right?
Hmm.
Where a lot of times when you look at her Instagram or Facebook pictures, photos, they're with celebrities. They're with,
Mm.
well, Park City is like a second
Park
home
Cities.
to
Yeah,
many.
sure.
So
Right.
yeah. So I wonder if that had to play into it in terms of, but you gave a better answer in terms of business acumen, right?
Mm.
Kind of looking at it from that perspective. But
I think there's something to your answer. I think if you're a dentist, let's say you're a dentist, you're saying, well, I'm not a clinical ninja and I don't mind the business side, but it doesn't get me excited. Another good question to ask is the one you're asking. Do you like to, are you social? Are you outgoing? Are you the type of person that throws the house party with the 47 different guests? If that's you, you're a fee for service doctor.
mhm, yeah,
Yeah.
got it, got it. What about this whole area of patient attrition, Brian? Like
Mm,
when it comes to buying a practice, can you speak to like
yeah.
patient attrition trends on both sides,
Yep.
PPO practices and fee for service practices?
I can, and I've got some data for you. Okay, so I've got some hard numbers to give folks as they're thinking about patient attrition, but let's define what people tend to say to me as they're acquiring a practice. So you asked the question, Ben, should I buy a PPO or fee for service practice? Implicit in that question sometimes is a fear that the buyer, to the dentist coming into the practice, is going to be a poor fit with the seller somehow, or the patients are going to be angry, or they're not going to be welcoming of the new doctor, and this new doctor will have dropped 800,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, and be sitting there twiddling the thumbs while she waits for patients to come back, right? And okay, so let's and the other often heard comment is PPO patients are stickier than fee for service patients, so risk of patient attrition is lower with a PPO practice. Okay, um, here's the data. First, the data is actually correct that patient attrition is lower in PPO practices, and fee for service practices do see more patient attrition than PPO practices. But here's the big but. If you stop listening right there, you'll make a mistake. So actually, let me give you kind of overall patient attrition numbers, and then let me break it down by fee for service and PPO. I'll ask it, Ben. I'm going to turn the tables on you. I'm going to ask you a pop quiz question. What do you
Okay.
think the average patient attrition number is for all dental practices, all specialties nationwide? Okay, rural, urban, suburban, doesn't matter. Like when the average buyer buys from the average seller, what percentage of patients don't show back up?
I would guess 10%.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty reasonable guess. Yeah. 1 out of 10. Um, you're dead wrong. I can't believe you host a podcast. Just kidding. Just kidding. And
Gee, thanks, Brian.
yeah. do you even work in dentistry? What the heck? No. The actual number is a negative number. It's actually negative 2.3% according to my data. And what does a negative patient attrition number mean? It means that the average buyer actually adds net patients to a practice, which makes sense if you think about it. You got a motivated, young, energetic buyer that's buying from a seller that in many cases is kind of checked out or on the twilight of their career, coasting or something like that. Not everybody, not every seller is that way, but that's kind of, those are general themes. Okay, so if the average patient attrition number is actually negative, that means attrition isn't really a thing in the average deal. Doesn't mean it won't be a thing in your deal, just means that you've got a tailwind. And the worry that you have, this internal like churning of the gut, oh no, are they going to like me, is unfounded, and they're going to love you, right? Average patients, they're going to love you, okay? There are some exceptions we can talk about, but let's break down my, I think I said 2.3. PPO practices, it's like 2.38 or something. So PPO practices, no patient attrition. In fact, it's just a little bit better than the average. And then in fee-for-service practices, here's the deal. It's right at like 1.5% in fee-for-service practices see an average net increase in the number of patients in year one of 1.1 to 1.5% more than the seller did on average, all specialties nationwide. Okay, so, but here's the deal. With the PPO practices, there's like 1, 2, maybe 3 patients that are just heartbroken that the seller is gone. And it's a very small number. With the fee-for-service practice, it's somewhere between 15 and 25 patients are very loud and very, very disappointed that the seller is not going to be there anymore. By the way, average patient count is like 2,000, 2,500 or something. So to have, let's say it's the bigger number, it's 25 patients loudly walking through the grocery store telling everybody they know, oh, I can't believe Dr. Wynn is gone and I have to deal with Dr. Smith now. And, that is hard. And as a buyer, gosh, it's the one negative Google review. Even though you got 86 positive ones, everybody remembers that one negative. But if you go in prepared that if I buy a fee-for-service practice, there's going to be a few more loudly negative patients. Just expect it. You're going to be fine. Most of the patients will love you.
That's amazing. So
Okay.
Follow-up question about these percentages.
Fire away. Yep.
Negative 2.3% is the average net patient. Are these from your clients?
Just my data. Yep. This isn't peer reviewed. Like, no PhD student kind of submitted this to a scholarly article. This is just my data. Yep.
Well, that's impressive because years ago when I was working, I used to communicate closely with transition brokers in Arizona when I was living there.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that gave me that 10% average, 10% attrition average. I remember, but that was like 12, 13 years ago.
And remember, I've got a biased sample size, right? I've got buyers who are willing to pay someone like me to help them through a transition. So maybe I've got a pool of buyers who are more business savvy than the average. So maybe the true nationwide average out there is actually a slightly negative number, but it's not. Everybody fears it's like your number, 10%, 20%, maybe, gosh, even 35%. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. So you're actually educated me on sort of what I'm thinking in my mind is that there are some existing patients that would naturally leave. But is this negative 2.3 sort of a balancing act with the aggressiveness of the new practice owner in terms of adding new patients to the practice, right? Does that have a
That's right. Yes. So notice I said net patients. Yes. So
yes.
You are going to lose some patients. You're going to lose some, and you're going to gain some patients. And the gain is because you're going to revamp the website and you're going to actually get rid of the toxic employee that everybody kind of talks about behind her back, but the seller never got rid of. And yes, it's going to be a net increase with some patients lost.
that's actually a better way to look at it, in my opinion. That's why I said you're one of the smartest, if not the smartest transition broker in the country, because
Thanks, man.
you do hear about this whole fear, like exactly what you talked about is that there's no goodwill, there's not enough, patients are leaving because this doctor's been here for many years.
Yep.
But when I think about the before and after picture of clients that buy practices, every recollection that I have, you're absolutely right. A year later, not only is it a net patient increase, but it's a net increase in revenue as well,
Right.
most of
Right.
the time.
Yep.
I wonder if it has to do with the process, right? Because you do see different methodologies among transition experts in the industry in terms of results. Like there are stories of like
Yeah.
a higher rate of doctors not like buying a practice, and practice continues to decline because that's the trend
Right.
of the existing practice owner, right?
Right.
What can you think of in terms of your process that sort of
Mhm.
helps with this whole net increase of 2.3%?
Yeah. The biggest piece of advice I can give is to make sure that there's a reasonable overlap in clinical fit. Okay. So sometimes you'll hear clinical fit phrased as due diligence. Sometimes you'll hear it phrased as, well, I had a lunch conversation with the doctor and we really clicked in terms of our philosophy. But clinical fit is going to be the major driver of that. And in the cases where I have seen a high number of patient attrition, by the way, the worst I've ever seen was negative 12%. Okay. So that's my
Wow.
all-time lowest number. And that, listen, if you bought $1 million practice and 12% of the patients didn't show up, that would hurt. Absolutely. But let's be real. Nobody's applying for unemployment. Doctors still making their student loan payments, and everybody still gets movie tickets. So it's not the disaster I think a lot of dentists fear, but that's the accountant talking. So let me kind of emotionally speak to that negative 12. It's usually because seller was a watch and wait, and the buyer was let's throw 4 crowns on anything that moves, type of doctor, and the whiplash for the patient is acute, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, like who is this guy? That they must not know what they're doing, because the last guy told me that I'm okay and we just need to watch these potential trouble spots. And yes, I had one kind of like green Mormon dentist buy in like a Hasidic Jew neighborhood in South Brooklyn, and that was like culture fit can be a thing, but I think most dentists are savvy enough that they're not stepping too far into those minefields.
Right, right. No,
Yeah.
that makes perfect sense. What advice do you have for students,
Mm,
coming right out of school? Do you recommend that, like for you do have a lot of students that are just so hungry to get into practice ownership, and many of them do right out of school.
yeah.
Like, what's your advice in the global scheme of things in terms of what would make for the best practice owner, right? In terms of their understanding of business and clinical and all that.
Hmm.
So for students, what's your advice to them in terms of when should I buy?
Mm. Wait 12 months post graduation, with the exception being if you did a multi-year specialty of some kind. You did ortho, pedo, OMS, some kind of specialty. My 12 months advice doesn't apply. But for any GPs, anybody that does GPR, AGD, something like that, um, I've talked to and helped a number of dentists buy immediately after their D4 year. And I call them up a year, 2, 5 years later and say, hey, if you could go back in time and buy the practice again, would you, or would you wait, a year or two? 100% of the time. They say, Brian, I'm glad I bought a practice. I learned a lot. I wish I would have waited. I didn't know. And it's usually something they thought was super important right out of dental school that later on they find out wasn't. It could be geography, could be the money, whatever it was. So my biggest piece of advice is use the weight. I listen, if I were coming out D4 or I did a 1 year residency of some kind, I would go work for someone that had a similar practice to the one I want to buy. And I would aim to buy a practice roughly 12 months after my education is finished, whatever that
Mhm.
looks like. Meaning 6 months after my education is finished, I'm looking for practices. I'm talking to brokers. I'm calling Brian Hanks. I'm talking to Ben Tuine, and I'm getting ready to close about 12 months after. Coincidentally, Ben, that's the magic number for banks. The banks that are
Yeah.
doing the lending, they want to see
Mm,
about 12 months, at least 12 months experience and some production history. Why?
got it.
Clinical skills, hand speed. You've seen some things, well, I thought I really liked implants. Now I've placed a bunch and actually, maybe I actually really like Invisalign. Um, those are the types of thoughts that people have, 12-ish months after they get out of school.
Got it. Got it. So this is a lot to do with banking relationships, right? They just want to see that you have some
It's
history.
two. It's the bank and it's the doctor gets a little time under their belt and
Mm,
they are clearer about where they actually want to take their career.
that's perfect. That makes perfect sense to me. Well, very good. So for those of you that might be listening in terms of not owning a practice yet, maybe getting into that here in the future, and we have a lot of military dentists that listen to the podcast that are thinking about practice ownership at some point after they retire. So the podcast for Brian is the practice purchase podcast, right? The practice
Yep.
purchase dot podbean.com. Is that the main
Yeah.
website?
You can go to
Okay.
iTunes and just search practice purchased or Spotify or any of those. And we did it like a season, Ben, as one of the advantage I have is transitions happen in a moment in time, right? And so people want to binge the topic, which is lucky for me. So it's more like a Netflix season. You can listen to 20 episodes. They're all 20 minutes or less, and they kind of break up the process of a practice
Mhm.
acquisition. But yeah, thanks. And it is nice to be in a podcasting world with other good folks like you. So I appreciate the shout out.
No, likewise, Brian. And then we're gonna have Brian on our Insurance Untangled webinar here on June 14th. So stay tuned for that. Go to insuranceuNtangled.com to get information on registration and so forth. We certainly look forward to more of your feedback on that
Thanks.
podcast. And we
Yeah.
do have a tentative from Howard Ferran, Dr. Howard
Yeah, I
Ferran.
saw that I'm on the panel with Howard. I thought, okay, I got to gear up. I'm going to have to speak loud. But no, he's
Yeah.
he's the podfather, right? And
Yeah.
he's such an important voice in the industry. I can't wait.
Yeah, I am looking forward to both of you because it's going to be a full hour that's dedicated to Brian and Howard in terms of picking your brain on all things business.
Great.
And what two better people? I mean, you can't think of any better two people to be on a panel
Thanks.
like that. So we're super excited. Brian, any closing thoughts for our listeners as we kind of wrap up today's episode?
Think about so two thoughts. Number one, if you're a dentist listening and you're a regular listener to this podcast, Ben's podcast, Insurance Untangled, you're the type of dentist very likely that has the inkling to be an owner. Don't be scared of it. Do it. Do it sooner than you think you're ready. Because if you're the type of dentist to listen to podcasts like this, you're going to be very successful. And I don't think you really do, but yeah, like in a sense, you kind of owe it to the industry. Like there's so many bad dentists out there. You're not one of them. Okay. Second thought is keep doing stuff like this. Keep attending the business focused CEs and there's so much in dentistry that's about the clinical skills. Those will always be your most valuable skills, the hands that go in a mouth. But your second most valuable skills are the business skills that you bring to the career. So keep doing stuff like this. Keep listening to Ben. Keep listening to Jordan. If you pop over to my podcast every once in a while, that'd be great. But keep talking about the business side of dentistry and you'll be in great shape.
Excellent, Brian. That's amazing. So for those of you that might be interested in Brian's topics, visit his website, dentalbuyersadvocates.com, and we'll have that posted in the show notes. You can see his team, articles, other resources, of course, his books and podcasts. All of those are on dentalbuyersadvocates.com. So check that out. Ryan, it's been super fun and also a privilege to have you on the podcast today. So we really appreciate you spending 25 minutes with us. And of course, you live down the street, and I think we need to have lunch maybe once or twice this year sometime.
Let's do it. Sushi, it's been a privilege to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
It's been our pleasure. And I want to thank our guests for joining us on another amazing episode of not dental insurance, the Insurance Untangled podcast. So if you enjoyed today's episode, share it with other listeners, especially those that are looking to do a practice purchase or thinking about it at some point. Check out Brian's website. He has a lot of amazing things. And of course, stay tuned to insuranceentangled.com. We are having a number of other series of webinars throughout the remainder of this year, where we will bring on other experts to sort of talk about all things business related, not just with insurance, but practice management in general. So till next time, hope everybody has a great day. And again, Brian, it's been a privilege. Thank you for being on the show today.